G'day, here I am again with another video. After I built the Millennium Falcon diorama, the Echo base diorama, I then found out that I had solo figures and stuff that I hadn't got out. So I went and found some pictures of Corellia, and I decided to build a base to put the figures on so that they stay in the one place in the cabinet. And because the cabinet's so huge and I've got to reach across, it was a way of maybe trying to get them to stick on and then be able to place the little stand where I needed to. So most of my builds actually start with my brother scan and cut machine, which cuts out I work out the images that I want and then put them into the cutter, and it saves me hours and hours and hours and hours of cutting. I have loved this machine, and it saves me a lot of time. So as you can see, this is cutting out the things that look like the imperial wall symbols, and this is an imperial symbol that I think I'm going to use for another build in the future, but I decided to just put it on this because of the spare space. So I could do this by hand, I could draw it up and cut it out, but this machine makes it so much quicker, and then I just peel the things off that I need, and away we go. So once all the bits were cut out, there was more bits that were railings and things that I also cut, and once all that was done, I was ready to go. I started with a piece of foam board, so that's cardboard on the outside and foam in the middle. Now I had a space that I had to work to in the cabinet, which is the pencil width on the left of your screen. Then I used the model of the speeder to sort of gauge the idea of the widths and things. So this is all arbitrary, just to, one, fit the space that I have to work with, and two, look still proportionate to the figures enough to get away with it. I cut out a channel to put some pipes on, because the pipes, according to the reference pictures, go beside the road. I only had one pipe of the right sort of width, so I cut it in half and then cut the lengths to get double the distance out of it. Didn't think about the bit that sticks out off the side needing to have a full circle, and later I had to fix that with a bit of cardboard. Then it was cutting up some, working out where I might want to have road base and roadway, and I got some plain black paper and just marked off the bits that I want road. This is so that when I do some dry brushing and some painting, there'll be some actual profile to the road, marking out where the grates go on it and cutting the pieces out for that. There's nothing particularly fancy about this. This is really easy stuff that everybody should be able to do, so hopefully it might inspire you to have a bit of a go at some things. Working with cardboard is one of my favourite mediums to work with. And I love doing resin stuff and doing all those things, but the basic paper and cardboard builds, I find them, apart from being really cost effective, they're just easy, and it's a lot of fun and works for me for problem solving and figuring out where I want things. And so I continued to cut worked out the angles and cut out the road things. This is trial and error. I had to cut this one a couple of times just to get the angle right for the piece of paper that I'd already put down there. So once I got all the angles done and what I wanted cut off, it went into place pretty easily, and then it was just a matter of gluing them on. Now that'll come in a second. Still just marking out the grates and the bits and pieces. There we go. So then it's a matter of gluing them on. Now I just use plain paper glue, so Yoo-hoo glue stick. I always do my gluing on a spare bit of paper and then get a fresh piece of paper and put it over the top and rub it down. This is a trick that I was taught by a friend, and thanks Juby. And you push it down, that way you don't get glue on your hands and you're not getting glue anywhere where you don't want it on your build. So once I'd glued all the roadway down and put the grates in, I then glued the railings on. So this is the grates just going in, so glue on them, put them down, get a bit of paper over the top of them, push them down. I always, after I've started gluing a bit, I fold the paper over, and so that you don't ever try not to put another piece down where you've had glue. And then it's just, like I said, PVA glue. After that, it's glue the railings on. So just again, PVA glue down the edges and then put all the paper railings on. In hindsight, in terms of, I shouldn't say in hindsight, in terms of scale to model, the railings are a little bit short, but I actually wanted to not impede on how they were going to, the model, the figures are still the things that I want you to see. So I decided to make the railings a little bit shorter so that they didn't stick up halfway up the figures, because it's just a display stand. It's not meant to be the be-all and end-all of Corellia builds. So then it was just a matter of hot glue gun, gluing the pipes on, and then I used the hot glue gun at places along the pipe to also indicate welds, which turned out I thought all right when they were finished. And so it's a matter of placing. As I said, made a bit of a blunder with this one that goes off the diorama on an angle, and had I had more pipe, I should have made it a whole pipe, but because I split my pipe in half to get twice as much length of pipe as what I needed, I had to glue paper around the underside of that one to make it look a little. I wasn't sure. In the final, when I put it into the cabinet, it doesn't actually. You don't see a great deal of it. It's hidden behind a Chewy and Orlando 6-inch figure, so I probably didn't need to muck around with it. But I did do it just out of being thorough enough to, just in case. It was a just in case fix. Things can go wrong all the time, and you just go with it. And if it had been really bad, I probably would have just pulled it off and got a piece of paper and made a fresh one just out of paper roll. I get my spare rolls from a painter that I work with, so when he's finished with his plastics, I get rolls. My family saves them for me from Glad Wrap and aluminium foil, and I get them wherever. Really good ones are the ones that come out of register rolls, are really good. And if you get the ones that come out of I used to work in a paint shop, and they had a 6-inch printer, track-fed printer, so every now and again I got a roll out of that. So I have a box with spare rolls in it. Then I had to make the little weather station, I suppose, antenna thing that appeared. I thought it'd look really good in that corner and just as a background for the thing. So I cut a roll, I then scored the black paper, and it's just gluing it and winding it around until I feel that there's enough width. And I do 4 or 5 of these at different spaces along the roll, and it gives you just a good chimney sort of a thing with some profile to it, not just a plain cardboard cylinder, so that when you paint it, and if you do a bit of dry brushing and weathering on it, you've got an interesting sort of a piece. And then it was leftover pieces of card from the railings that I had left over. When I get my machine to cut things out, I tend to keep all of the pieces, even the negative bits that are cut out of it. And I find sometimes when I'm doing a street, or if you've got a piece of wall or something or other, you can just glue them in place, and again it gives you a little bit of texture and a little bit of decent looking stuff that's just greeblies that go on the bits and pieces. So after that had been glued, and I glued that little fin on the side, I left that overnight, and then that plastic bit that's got the weirdo shape there, that's from a what do you call it, electrolyte drink. It's the end out of that. So again, if I see interesting shapes and things, I always hang on to them for builds, and I've got a box with bits and pieces in them. Gluing straws and stuff on's always tricky, so I went with super glue for this one and bicarbonate down the end of it to make it more substantial amount to glue to. That and gluing a piece of paper to the straw, I ended up with a reasonably robust aerial. This is not going to be played with. It sits purely in the cabinet. If it had been something that was going to have to be played with in a game, I would have gone to a lot more effort to make sure that that straw was stuck on, because it wouldn't stand transport and it wouldn't stand gameplay, but it was robust enough to be sitting there. I bumped it a few times and it didn't fall off, but I did notice that had I given it a real solid whack, it would have probably required re-gluing. Then it was glue that onto the edge of the board, and as far as the build of this goes, that's pretty much it, finished, except for gluing those imperial looking things on the pattern that you see in the Death Star and on the Imperial buildings. I glued that around the end of the board in the bits that are facing outwards. They're not really Corellia, but it just finished it off and made it not so much a piece of cardboard looking at you. Anything that's foam, because I usually spray at least a primer coat on things, anything that was foam I painted with PVA glue just to make sure that it's not going to, not going to melt when I put the panels on, when I do the spraying. Then it was a time for figuring out where I wanted to put all the figures that I have. So I started with the speeder and thought it can come down and be going around the corner. And then it was open up the figure packets. I am not an in-box collector. I am an out-of-box collector. So Hasbro, if you make sure you paint both sides of the figures, because I am going to inspect them. So I got the figures out from the various packs and things that I wanted to use. Originally I had 2 range troopers, but I have ordered the figures that I was missing from the solo range, so the range troopers are going to just go in with Imperials, and the only Imperial stormtrooper sort of person that did end up on the build is actually the patrol trooper, because he was from Corellia. So the other things will just turn up in a generic Imperial thing, Mimban or one of those. So this was the layout that I decided was going to be good, which allows for the other figures that I haven't got that were coming, things like the Corellia Hound and the other couple of figures. And this is gluing the ends on. So these are those bits, again, if I'd had to cut them out by hand, could have done it, but if I had to do it, would have taken a long time. So glued them on, and then everything's ready to go. The figures were all in place. After I'd marked the figures, I put a little pencil mark and then jammed a little 1.5mm dowel. Should have had 2mm. Went online to try and buy it. Nobody in Australia had any at the moment. It's all out of stock. I'm blaming COVID. So I went with some matchsticks and some 1.5mm things for the bases to come up into the feet. In hindsight, I would recommend that you take a figure and get the right width for the foot, because the ones that were a little bit too skinny, a couple of the figures wobble. Hand from the Heist and a couple of others, Chewy I think is a little bit wobbly too. They did stay on, but they weren't as tight as the ones that I used the matchsticks for, that really keep their stability. Airbrushing, I did a base coat in the light grey, thought I would rather go with a bluey grey, airbrushed that. It was an absolute disaster, and I've cut that bit of film. You would not believe how many times I had to clean that airbrush out. And then after that I dabbed around a bit, but it was a bit early in the piece, so it showed some of the lighter colour through. This isn't really going to be an issue, because as you'll see now, I start to airbrush some darker colour and to get a little bit of motley effect going on before I do try and spray on the lines, and before I do the weathering. It's all right. I had a look at the pictures, and it's all sort of motley and hard to tell what it's made out of. It could be concrete, or it could be some fantastic sci-fi thing that we don't know about. I went around and painted the edges with the darkest grey, the same as the pipes, and then did a little bit more fiddling with colours, and sprayed a darker one on again. This will all even out when I get when I do some washes over the top. Cut a stencil out, did this one by hand because it wasn't very hard for my yellow lines, sprayed it on, used spray adhesive just to hold it down. Didn't work, so there's lots of finger holding and hoping for the best. And again, it's just a little display thing. It's mostly to give the impression of the Corellia roadways, so I wasn't particularly worried. Had this been a model for a exhibition or a competition, I would have been really miffed, because they're not super crisp, but they look okay. You can see in the photos. So that's with all of the majority of the paint job done. Anything that popped up in the paper, there's only a couple of places where it popped up. I just put a bit of glue under it and pushed it back down again, and it went flat. So then it was do a wash on it. So I got my, oh no, it was a dry brush of a silvery sort of a grey colour. I mixed it up. So I did the grates so that they were a little bit more obvious, just a light brush on them. I did a little bit of dry brushing along the pipes just to highlight those weld marks and things like that, and a bit of mucking around here and there, putting a little bit on the railings and trying to just add a little bit of lighter colour. Then I went with just a wash, and this gives you all your weathering. So I put mine on fairly thick where the pipes were so that it did make it look a slightly different colour to the roadway. Then it's just a matter of placing it into the grooves and then dabbing it off so that it's not so heavy. This wash is made with acrylic thinner. You can get the recipe for it, thank you very much, from Geek Gaming. He did a video on making your own oil wash, weathering wash, and I used it and it was fantastic. It's been this one, I made a heap of it and it's cost me next to nothing. I've been using it for I think every video I've ever made so far, and I'm not even close to being at the bottom of it, so a very cheap way of doing it. I just keep doing it until it's dirty enough and until I feel like the lines from the paper lines and the things are defined enough. I was using a really big brush to start with, and it was a really basic art brush, and then I switched to a finer brush for getting into some of the details and trying to do a little bit of weathering on that tower aerial thing, and to make the grates look good, and I thought they were looking a little bit white. And then I went through and highlighted, or I don't know whether it's a highlight when you're doing a shadowy thing, but defined might be a better word, some of the lines on the piece. Then that was pretty much leave it to dry, and then it's display the figures on it. So here's some shots through the process, just some stills. I think that must have been before the weathering. Here's some after the weathering. So that's the pipes. The welds look alright, they're just hot glue. And again, this is all again just to display the figures. So then it was a little bit of dry brushing of silver. I just did a little bit of silver here and there. I did a bit too heavy on some of these grates, so I did come back with the wash over the top of it to take it back off. But it's just here and there, usual sort of thing, nothing flash about. With dry brushing, you just do it light on. I always take it off on some newspaper before I start the brush bit. I had run out of the dry brushing paint and I was using regular silver, which is why it went on a bit heavy in some places. So there you go, just a quick spin around, and then it was find figures, stick them on. With the extra paint on, it did, the 1.5mm dowel did go a little bit better, and like I said, it was only a couple of them. Chewbacca is a bit wobbly when you move him around, and the Han Solo in the bottom of the screen, he fell over a couple of times, but on the whole, they're presented well. There's room there for the ones that I'm missing, and I was pretty chuffed with the way that it all came out, and it looks really good in the cabinet. After this little bit, there's just a couple of stills pretty much for this. I took a couple of photos with just my phone so that you could all see it without me trying to get it in context. And then I took a couple of glamour shots of after I'd put it into the cabinet with the rest of the Millennium Falcons and things that I had. So I've now got a Han Solo exhibition of sorts, like the Han Solo's Smithsonian, because everything's Millennium Falcon and all the Han things. So pretty chuffed, looks good. There you go. That's it. It's in the space that it's got. That's from the sideways of it. And then there's me Echo base build with the thing, all the Hoth things that I wanted to put with it, and more of the thing. So thank you very much. There's a bit of a blurb about that Patreon thing if you want to stay and listen to it. Thanks for watching. Hey, before I lose your attention completely, I'd like to give a shout out to a young Australian author that's up and coming. If you really like fantasy, I can totally recommend to you A Collision of Victory and Disgrace. It's on Patreon. You can find it at Patreon Shemanigans, and the info's up on the screen. She also does a Redbubble site, which will come up on the screen in a minute. But it's a really good story, and this is a young writer that's trying to make a bit of a way in the world. The prices start at $1 and go up to $10 a month if you want to really support her. And the $10 a month one gets you it personally read. At the moment, I've been informed that it's about a third of the way through. It's been going for a while now, but if you sign on now, you get all the months that have preceded it, so you can certainly catch up and get right into it. If you'd like to support that particular young writer and authors like her, then please do, and go and check out those websites, or go to Redbubble and get yourself some really good artwork. This is not a paid sponsorship. I don't do my YouTube for commercial anything. I don't get paid for any of it. But this particular author I know really well, and I think that it's worth plugging and trying to help people as they try and get a start up in the industry. Thank you. Have a really fun day. Bye.